All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Eliza Solovier, Eliza Solowieej. Myself and Brennan Schiller will be co-emceeing today. Today we had to file a lawsuit to compel the city to stop Incommunicado detention and allow people their phone calls and attorneys. You'll hear from 6 speakers about the law behind that and how, despite our efforts together over the years, it has gotten worse this year rather than better. Brendan?
So we're here today because, as Eliza just said, it's gotten worse. You're going to hear over the course of these 6 speakers how there's been a fight for decades, how there was recent issues this year, but more importantly, as we sit here today, we anticipate that there'll be hundreds of people in the city of Chicago arrested who will not be given access to a phone or an attorney until they're released if they have a misdemeanor or until they're processed if they have a felony. And that's been the course of conduct, but it's gotten so bad that it required this emergency legal action. Today you will hear from individual plaintiffs, people representing plaintiff organizations, including a governmental agency, and attorneys, all who bear witness to that. Before you hear from the first person, I was asked to read a real brief statement on behalf of Malcolm London. For those of you all who don't know, Malcolm is a activist and an artist, and on just 3 weeks ago, he was arrested and beaten, and he was isolated and disappeared. So I'm going to read that brief statement, and then we're going to hear from the first plaintiff. These are Malcolm's words. Although I can't be here today, I wanted to say a few words. This is the second time in my 27 years on this earth where I have experienced a life-threatening arrest at the hand of the police. After both times, I had nightmares for weeks. Oddly enough, the nightmares weren't about the batons hitting the back of my head, nor the officer's knees in my back, nor the zip ties cutting off circulation to my hands. No, it's not just about the physical violence that scares me. The thing I have nightmares about most is being in custody. I wasn't terrified of what already happened to me, but I was afraid of not knowing what could happen to me in custody. The first time I was arrested in 2015, I sat for nearly 12 hours before I even knew I was being charged with what I was being charged with or why I was arrested. This time, it wasn't until I sat in the hospital handcuffed to a wheelchair for nearly 8 hours before I saw a lawyer, Javon Buckley. I'm not sure how he found me because I was never given a police call or phone call prior to his arrival. After talking with the police, Javon assured me that I'd be released as soon as my injuries were tended to and after I was taken back to the jail. However, when I arrived at the police station, although I expected to be released immediately, I wasn't, and no one would tell me anything. I was exhausted, my body ached from the bruises, I hadn't slept. I thought I was alone. I was afraid I would be locked up with no end in sight. It wasn't until a friend's uncle, who was a police officer, saw me that I was able to get a phone call. My lawyer, who was there all night and morning, never left, communicated to me that they were trying to trump up my charges. Once I got off the phone with him, I requested to see him in person multiple times. Eventually, they allowed me to. After seeing my lawyer, I went back to my cell and waited for another hour before being brought back out of my cell to meet with 3 detectives who finally read me my Miranda rights. I hadn't been read them since I was in custody. They tried to get information out of me, even though I told them my lawyer was right outside in the precinct lobby. However, once I invoked my rights, they disengaged and sent me back to my cell with no further information. I waited until almost 7 p.m. to be released, even though I had left the hospital at 5 a.m. I've had several nightmares about being in custody and terrified I'd be locked up without any explanation or contact with the outside world. I wasn't the only person in custody crying out for information or asking to talk to my lawyer. The precinct either refused to give us information or pretended they had no information to give. This is indicative of how much of a failure the system is. It fails at every step of the way, even for something as simple as due process and a phone call. We cannot continue to fund a system that is broken. This has been going on for decades and it must stop. Every day, people are disappeared into cages and their human rights are violated. I've now experienced this twice, and I continue the nightmares, and I fear my nightmares may become my reality. Arrested at the same time, at the same location, and disappeared also with Malcolm London was Christopher Brown, a poet who you're going to hear from now.
How y'all doing? My name is Christopher Brown. I go by the name of Thought Poet. I'm a poet, photographer, organizer. I came to talk about my experience after I was locked up, and not just only how traumatizing it was, but also how I saw other youth that were in the precinct, how they were not given any attention as well. When I was taken to the precinct, I had handcuffs that were cutting into my wrist, handcuffed to a bench, and I sat there for about 4 to 5 hours, being antagonized by officers. I was not asked about my injuries. I was not read my rights either. We sat there for about 4 to 5 hours only to get processed, and I wasn't asked about a phone call. I wasn't asked about anything that had happened to me. And after I was processed, photo taken, fingerprints taken, they put me in a jail cell that was only made for one person. And so from there, myself and my comrade and homie, Damon Williams, I let him sleep on the bed while I slept on the floor. And to be honest with you, because I had gotten beaten out of my phone, I did not have a phone on me. I didn't know what happened to my phone after I had gotten put into the car. And so majority of the time that I was in the cell, because they took Damon out once or twice, but majority of the time I was there by myself. And to be honest with you, like, I was scared. I was extremely scared, just because my grandmother, who has physical issues, who can't really get around to do that much, she didn't know where I was. My sister didn't know where I was. No one knew where I was. And it was just a daunting feeling knowing that I was closed off from any way to even communicate with anyone. And so, yeah, like, that experience was the same experience that several different youth in that precinct experienced as well, where either they didn't have their phone, they weren't asked, or they weren't given a phone call. They were mistreated terribly while they were waiting. Some had injuries, just like myself and Damon. We were not asked about our injuries. We were not asked about anything. We were literally just sitting there. And because of the COVID-19 crisis, no one had on face masks. The only people that had on face masks were police officers. I think the face mask I had at the time was ripped. I think Damon's he didn't even have one. And so we were completely just in a contaminable space. And again, that wasn't the worst part for me. The worst part, again, was knowing that this might just be it. Like, no one would know where I am. And, thank God and thank the organizers that I work with that, people did find me. But this is an experience that I don't want any youth, because all of the folks that were locked up that day were young folks. And majority of them were complaining about how they were arrested out south, but they were brought all the way over to different precincts that they were not familiar with because they were kids, 16, 17 years old. And this has to stop. Like, the trauma that I'm going through right now, having these nightmares, crying literally every other day, still wondering about my injuries, still wondering about what's going to happen to me even afterwards. I don't want any other child to experience this. And that's why the funding, and that's why we are bringing this to people's attention, because this is more than important. Like, this is a scary situation, and I truly, truly do not wish this upon anybody else. So, thank you.
Thank you, Chris. You're incredibly brave. Imagine everybody being disappeared by an agency and coming to confront them and say, you're not going to do this to anybody else. I'm so proud of everybody back here for putting their foot down about this. And a courageous leader behind this is Amy Campanelli, Cook County Public Defender. She has committed public defense for everyone in Chicago police custody and has been blocked by Chicago. Amy Campanelli, thank you. Please.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Amy Campanelli, Campanelli. I am the public defender for Cook County, and I've been the public defender since 2015, but I've been doing this work since 1987. I want to thank, of course, Malcolm London and his incredible story about what he just went through, Christopher Brown, what he just told you. But first, I need to also thank all the attorneys that have been involved and the tremendous amount of work that they put into preparing this action and standing with basically my clients who have been arrested and not allowed to call an attorney, not allowed to call in a family member, anyone, and been isolated by the Chicago police. My thanks go to Alexa Van Brunt, who is here with us today, and Sheila Betty from the Northwestern Pritzker Law School, Craig Futterman from the University of Chicago Law School, Brendan Schiller, who you've already met from Schiller Prior, Daniel Masoglia from First Defense Legal Aid, Eliza Solange, also from First Defense Legal Aid, and Joey Mogul from the People's Law Office. This has been a collaborative effort to get here, to stand here today and tell you about what we're doing. And I also want to thank, of course, my staff, who have put in the hours to represent clients in custody over the past 2 years when we had the right to go to police stations upon arrest and represent people who do not have lawyers. But my office has been gathering data for those 2 years, and we use that data to help us file this lawsuit today. The ones, however, as you know, who deserve the most praise go to the plaintiffs who stand here today and others who were arrested, who were not afforded their basic human, civil, and constitutional rights. They have come forward, signed affidavits, relived the nightmares that you just heard about to make change from this police department. Following the law, being professional, treating their fellow man and woman with dignity, and working with the community. Isn't that what we all should expect from our police and law enforcement every day? I agreed to join this lawsuit against the Chicago Police Department because the practices of isolating those arrested, preventing them from calling their families or a lawyer, denying them access to a basic thing called a phone, ignores the fundamental rights of all of us. And we should all be angry about this. Chicago is considered, unfortunately, the false confession capital of the world because of the abuses by this Chicago Police Department, because of the abuses that call into question the validity of arrests and interrogations. The law has required, since 1963, Miranda was 1966. Since 1963, the law has required that every person who is arrested be permitted to communicate with and consult with an attorney within a reasonable time upon arrest. Yet that law has been ignored by this police department for 60 years. One of the ways for the police to gain any type of trust or credibility with our communities is through transparency and respecting that those arrested have constitutional rights. They have human rights. They have civil rights. Access to an attorney and to a phone are not favors or a choice by the police. They are fundamental rights. During the recent protests, attorneys from my office, as well as attorneys from around the city, some of them you'll hear from today, were denied access to clients who were hidden away. By our count, by my data that I have been collecting, only 10% of those arrested were given access to an attorney. And when they were, it took an average of 5.5 hours before they were handed a phone to call an attorney or call their loved ones. You know, we have to start holding Chicago police and its leadership accountable. When are we going to start doing that? I was on the Police Accountability Task Force before Mayor Lightwood was the mayor. I helped write that 98-page document. I have yet to see reforms from that document. That was 2.5 years ago. Reform starts when it is recognized that no one, especially the police, is above the law. Police want, and they deserve, to be respected. But their job is to serve and protect, which includes giving respect to the people they serve. When you treat people with dignity, when you stop the authoritarian practices of treating people inhumanely, trust and cooperation with the community follows. And I have been telling this department and anyone who will hear me this since I've been the public defender. The disappearing acts of clients by the police and the lack of phone calls for our clients must stop now. Thank you.
Public Defender Campanelli just referred to the mayor's task force, the Police Accountability Task Force for 2016, which included folks like Eliza and the mayor, which had a list of reforms, including the basic reform that the city of Chicago actually followed the law that was passed in 1963 that says you have a right to a phone call within an hour of arrest. It's pretty much black letter law. That recommendation didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of 50 years of history of abuse that led to things like John Burge and Holman Square. It was an understanding that the regular and consistent violation of the first fundamental right of an access to a phone call to let your family know where you are and to get your attorney there has been violated as part of a pattern of practice that involves a series of tactics that every police officer uses and knows. Every police officer lies when family members call to a police station and tells them that they can't tell them something on the phone. Every police officer, or the vast majority of police officers, use the tactic of telling people when they show up to a police station they can't tell them if the person's there if they're not a lawyer. The vast majority of police officers use the tactic of not allowing lawyers to see their clients until after their process, not allowing phone calls until after a process. All of these are tactics that are part of a considered practice designed to violate the law. And one of the products of that practice is a community rightfully distrustful of the police. The next speaker you're going to hear from is been an activist and organizer in 3 of those different organizations who've seen how the community's been impacted and is really the reason some of those organizations have to exist. For the last several years, Amika Tendaji, I should have asked her before that. Amika Tendaji has worked with Umedics, Stop Black Lives Matter, and has been at the forefront of fighting these consistent and regular violations.
Good morning. Organizations like mine, Black Lives Matter Chicago, are fighting for our very right to exist. We are fighting to walk in the park and live, not be killed like Rakia Boyd, to be able to answer our own door and not be killed like Betty Jones was. We are fighting for our right to literally walk and breathe and live and exist. And I would think that a city like Chicago would stand on that side, would be supportive of that, right? Organizations like Black Lives Matter Chicago had to get together with a bunch of other organizations, form the Campbell plaintiffs, and get a consent decree that doesn't seem to be honored in any way by Mayor Lightfoot, by this administration. And we are still fighting for our right to not be killed by those people who are sworn to protect us and serve us. We would think that Chicago would honor that. We would think that Chicago would support that. We would think that Chicago would hate that those people fighting for our lives, our right to exist, instead of being thanked, instead of being supported, instead of being followed, are continuously being jailed and disappeared. And this is America. High-level, highly known protesters and activists being disappeared on a regular basis. So what do you think that is happening to citizens of Chicago who can't get in front of a mic for a press conference? And so we will continue electing aldermen that use their aldermanic privilege to get into a police station where lawyers cannot. And we will continue marching, and we will continue filling up these jails until Chicago recognizes that this is the wrong side of history to be on and follows us to the right side. We are going to stand on the side of justice. Chicago, which side do you want to be on?
I'm with you, Amika. I don't know how you do it. AMIKATEND AJI. Yeah, I don't know how you do it. I know you shouldn't have to, and that's why we're here as people, as mothers, and in addition to being the attorneys that will take this to court. We didn't rush into a lawsuit. We tried engaging in committees and task forces. Young people did action research to actually survey people in their own communities to find out if their experience was common. These young people, 4 years ago, began planning legislative solutions. This winter, we had to let them know that the hearing that they had prepared for on an ordinance would not happen, and to help them think through what are other ways to solve this problem by engaging our civic structures. And they said, well, you're lawyers, right? Maybe we need to sue them. And so it took them saying, we have to do what we have to do. And that's a beautiful thing, for them to have trusted the court to hear. And for them to be brave enough to say, we will tell the world that people are being disappeared and we won't allow it anymore. The next speaker is from the National Lawyers Guild. They have a program that was prepared to protect protesters and is prepared to protect protesters as the movement continues for Black Lives to Matter. And they had such trouble with their clients being disappeared, and even their attorneys facing physical aggression from the police for wanting to help provide for what is this right to counsel and phone calls to actually deploy the counsel. Molly Armour.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eliza. Molly Armour, on behalf of the Mass Defense Committee of the National Lawyers Guild of Chicago. That's MOLLYARMOUR. And I'm both grateful, we are both grateful to the attorneys who are filing this lawsuit today, and we are also saddened that we are still in the same position. The National Lawyers Guild has a special history with representing and uplifting activists, protesters, and movements across the United States and here in the city of Chicago. And we know that when you arrest people in the midst of participating in their First Amendment protected associational and speech freedoms, you remove them from the streets. You're already taking a step of infringement in that arrest to cut off those First Amendment rights to protest the state of the valuation of Black lives here in the city and across the country. But we also know historically, and we know that here today, nationally, that activists who are in custody are being visited by law enforcement and asked about their associational freedoms, asked about their political values. So we have a double constitutional violation. And we know also in the Guild that the Chicago Police Department has a history of disappearing political clients, has a history of disappearing activists. And when we are cut off from our ability to reach those activists, it is a triple constitutional violation. We knew that we had clients. We had people who had been arrested, who had sustained violent attacks from the police. And we still could not reach people. This is going to end. This history is going to end. And the activists are going to bring an end to that. And we are grateful for this lawsuit and the ability to continue to advance these political freedoms of the people in the street advocating for their own rights without political repression. It ends.
For the last 10 years in the city, who've been leading this fight really are the youth. Mostly black youth, black and brown youth, since we charged genocide up until this very moment. At the vanguard of the protests and those people feeling that repression in the last few weeks is an organization called Good Kids, Mad City. The next speaker is somebody who just graduated from high school, but for the last year has been active. Yeah, give her some for just graduating from high school. But for the last year has been an active protester and was one of those people unlawfully disappeared on the first night of protesting. Her name is Alicia Leaner.
Hello, my name is Alicia Leaner. I'm 18 years old and I just recently graduated from King College Prep. I'm also a part of Good Kids Mad City, which is a youth-led organization fighting to end gun violence in Chicago. I'm here today because my rights were violated and I was falsely arrested. My organization had to spend time, money, and resources to ensure my safety and the safety of hundreds of other protesters who were disappeared by CPD. We want justice for protesters like me who were denied access to an attorney, who were denied decent food while being locked up for 12 plus hours, women who were denied privacy and dignity and forced to use the bathroom in public under male gaze, who were denied safety precautions against COVID-19, being handcuffed to a pole next to other people without a mask, and to stand in solidarity with those who were brutally beaten and wrongfully arrested. That's why I'm here with GKMC. Thank you.
Thank you. So our final speaker is Damon Williams. And this really brings it all together. You know, in 2011, the police department agreed in response to our confronting them about Homan Square and routinely disappearing people there, that they would track how many attorneys came to see the arrestees so that they could report and use that data. Since then, you know, Homan Square continues to be an issue. Damon Williams has been a huge leader in highlighting it as a symbol of the militarized police tactics, including incommunicado detention, that are being used not just at Homan Square, but as you see today, still at every single police facility in Chicago. Thank you, and let me call up Damon Williams. Thank you.
Again, my name is Damon Williams, DamonWilliams. I'm a co-founder of the Let Us Breathe Collective, the hashtag, one word, Let Us Breathe Collective. I stand here in a place of privilege, and with that privilege comes responsibility. About a month ago, a few weeks ago, me and many people that I care about deeply were attacked and abused a few minutes after arriving to a protest. Part of my experience in trying to protect women that were being hit with batons and shields and pushed and kicked and pushed and slammed to the ground was being hit repeatedly with batons. I was slammed to the concrete at least 4 times. One of those times I was slammed directly on my head with my full body weight. I was then continued to be hit with batons. I was suffocated. I had my face pressed into the street of 53rd Street in Hyde Park. And as they were trying to put my wrist into zip ties, an officer kneeled his entire body weight on my neck, the same procedure that killed George Floyd. I was out there because America is rising up because of thousands of killings, but namely the killing of George Floyd. The abuse that we are protesting is their response to our protests. So from being assaulted and abused, I was arrested and named as disorderly. And I was taken to 51st and Wentworth, and I was there for approximately 7 to 8 hours. Me and Christopher were chained to a bench for about 3 to 4 hours and then berated with poorly thought out and not really deeply logical arguments about politics and about the justification of police abuse by mostly black police officers for about 3 to 4 hours. I am privileged, like I said. So my family was with me when I was taken. They saw me be put into a car. I am privileged because I have some of the most well-connected lawyers and legal spaces in the state that know my name. I am privileged because in the back of that police car, I was confident that the mayor's office and the state's attorney's office would be aware of my name and what just happened to me. And I knew that that is a unique position. Multiple older people came to the police station and were denied entry. I was chained to this bench for about 3 to 4 hours, then was standing in the hallway for about another 1 to 2 hours before I was put into a cell. From that hallway, I was able to see my attorneys and see Alderwoman Rosanna Rodriguez show up, and it was still at least 2 hours before I was able to communicate with them. When I was able to see an attorney, one, he did not know, or he was told that Chris Brown was not there, when I told him Chris Brown had been sitting next to me for 6 hours. So there's two things that I want to uplift about this, right? Because there are a lot of people who are paying attention right now because there's an uprising to change our society. There's a claim that we need to divest from these systems and we need to do these suits and we need accountability, but the solution is not how do we fix violence. The solution is how do we move away from violence, and that scares a lot of people, and that brings cameras and that brings conversation. So now that we are in this conversation, know that this is not a new fight, right? I've been doing this work now for 6 years. Like has been mentioned, in 2016, my organization did a 6-week occupation across from the facility known as Homan Square. We called a vacant lot across the street Freedom Square, which we intended to be the antithesis of that space, to uplift the violence that happens to black people everywhere, and particularly here in Chicago at the hands of police. We just wanted to oppose a very racist ordinance known as Blue Lives Matter. We want to give some people some food. We want to talk about new restorative alternatives and build a greater vision for what we want our society to be. In that space, again, operating from privilege and even naivete, we wanted to educate our community about what's going on, right? So we would ask the people the question, do you know what that building is right across the street? Many people would say, no, what is it? I guess it's a police station. I see a lot of cars. But many other people would say, oh no, I know exactly what that is. My uncle was in there. My little brother was in there. I was in there. And so pretty soon it became clear that Freedom Square just being a stage for political theater at large was inappropriate, and we had to name a specific harm that is happening. And so in that space, I was deeply educated because it went from let's talk about racism at large to let's talk about what's happening in our city. Because on one day, 2 days after being there, I spoke to a middle-aged man in the middle of the night who was helping us grill, and he said, I was in there when I was somewhere between 17 and 19 years old. You know, black people in age, it's hard to tell by the face. I didn't ask how old he was. I assumed he was at least 37. He could have been 64. I don't know. But he said in his young years, he was placed there. And then that same day, a 17-year-old said, I was there this summer. And so it became pretty clear that there were not many households in this community that did not have 1 degree of separation from this place where people are beaten with phone books, being tied up, being strip searched, being sexually assaulted, not knowing where they are, in rooms that are not jail cells, so they don't even have access to a toilet. And they are there for hours, for days, many times entering through darkness, so they don't even know where the building is literally in the world. From that, got a lot of education that there's been work about this for years. And I really want to uplift young people because I'm foggy on the numbers, and I'm sure y'all can follow up with Brendan and all the folks at the Public Defender's Office, but somewhere between 85 to 90% of adults don't get access to a phone call. And I believe, and again, I'm foggy on the numbers, it's somewhere between 97 to 99% of young people, juveniles, don't get access to a phone call. So we need to look at this in 2 ways. The system needs to be defunded and divested because it's structurally violent. Homan Square and the work of John Burge was not bad policing, was not a bad day, right? Was not individual actors who were just bad apples. That was structured, and there's no way that the entire police department was not invested and committed and complicit in this action of false confession, illegal detention, and torture. But then also we need to know that this space is not what you've seen on the news and not what you've seen on Law and Order and movies. These are not savvy, technologically advanced heroes that are here catching bad guys and protecting people. These are bureaucrats that don't really know how to do their job. So it was a 1-page form, and it took them 4 hours to figure it out for my family to know where I was, even though they knew I was there, right? And then I was standing in the hallway for about 2 hours, me and Chris, with the 15-year-old and the 16-year-old. And while they were there, they were being antagonized and joked with police. Some of the things that were said is, once you get older, you can go to Cook County and name that they would be raped and sexually violated, name that they would have their teeth knocked out, name that they would be forced to carry contraband, and this was his point of humor. Another officer joked about how he didn't use the word have sex, but said he would have sex with one of the young person's mother for $40. Then they asked him about them playing basketball and what they want to major and what they think they're going to do and how they're going to keep experiencing violence. If they don't shape up, they're going to end up dead or in jail. I watched them through multiple shifts because these are just bureaucrats who are just doing the job and doing it poorly, who are tired and just want to go home, who say, hey, do we have to transfer these kids to juvenile? And they said, yes, that's what the shift guy said before us, and now he left. So now we're waiting on somebody to come pick them up. And then the next shift supervisor came and said, hey, we were supposed to fill out their paperwork 4 hours ago. And then they said, well, we have to send them to juvenile either way, or you know what we could do? We could contact their family. And the police officer that joked about having sex with one of their mothers, these young boys are actually cousins, so it was actually just one family that they'll call, and they didn't know that for 5 hours, said, oh, I didn't think of that. And then called his grandmother at 10 p.m. and said, hey, we're going to have to process these boys unless somebody from the family can come. She said, I don't have a car, and guess what? The mayor shut down public transportation, so I don't have a way to get there. It became clear that I heard that maybe an uncle or somebody was coming to pick them up, but these were teenagers. They were in high school. They played basketball. They were out on that day. They actually didn't get caught taking anything. They were just in a place where police officers deemed they should not be. And they were sitting for 5 hours, getting harassed, being joked with, and no one called their family. And this is happening while the news is watching. This is happening on the day where everybody in America is talking about how black people, how young black people are being mistreated and being killed. And so what I want y'all to know is this is an institutional practice, but they're also not equipped to do what you think they're doing. They don't know how to do the paperwork. They are not catching bad guys. They are bureaucrats that just want to check. And so do we want to continue investing into a military to address communal violence? Everywhere in the world, militaries abuse people. So it's no secret that they're not following the law here. This is illegal, what they do. We are paying people to uphold the law who operate with illegality. We need a new system. 40% of our resources is being invested into illegality. If you watch TV, and again, I kind of just criticize TV, you know the first thing anybody is supposed to get is their rights read in a phone call. And like I just said in my own experience, I'm educated. I've talked to hundreds of people who've had this experience. I know Brendan Schiller. I know the statistics. But my face was bleeding and I was enraged and I was chained to a bench. And even me in my vulnerable state, as somebody who probably knows more than 99% of the population about this very instance, did not think myself to ask for a phone call. My lawyer came and said, hey, does he have a mask? And she said, oh, I didn't think about that. And gave me a mask and no one else got him until I said, hey, you should give him to everybody else. My lawyer came and said, where's Chris? Oh, no, actually, he thought Chris was somewhere else. I told him, hey, you know, Chris is with me too. He said, no, we didn't know that. We were told he was somewhere else. So this is a system of disappearance. This is a system of torture. I believe detention, even when done legally, is harmful and actually is a form of torture, but we do have some laws. And we need to know that our institution that we pay to so-called protect and serve, which they don't do, they hunt and capture. That hunting and capturing is not even done within the very basic laws that we have set up. And so we are demanding that we divest from these systems, that we defund police. But right now we need to know that this suit is a righteous fight and it's something that we should win, and it's obvious. We're not saying, hey, pass a new law, just follow the laws that already exist. And I want you to ask the question, why the people who we charge to beat, cage, kill people for so-called not following the law are able to function with impunity and illegality.
At this point, we'll open up for questions for anybody. If I'm gonna play a little offensive line for the questions for the individual plaintiffs. I want you to ask them for me first before I let you know if they'll answer. But otherwise, you can just ask any of the organizations any questions if you have questions.
Just to clarify, reasonable time under the law has been ruled by the courts to be about an hour?
No, so there. Sure. So as all of y'all who've covered Springfield know, there's a rulemaking process which has the force of law. So while the statute says reasonable time, IA 20 IAC 720.20 has defined for more than 4 decades reasonable time as 1 hour. So that has, because those rules then get approved by the legislature, that is essentially part of the statute. So reasonable time has been defined by the state legislature as 1 hour. So it's black letter law. You don't need a court to say it. It's what the statute says.
What exactly are you seeking from the court? Is this an injunction to help stop what?
So it's a mandamus. It's basically an action to force the city of Chicago to follow the law. And that's all. Force the city of Chicago to follow the law. Police department needs to give folks access to phones within an hour, and then when their attorneys arrive, give folks access to their attorneys, and stop all of the tactics that prevent that from occurring.
Have you got a court date for a hearing? Anything coming up?
Not yet. Not yet. I mean, we filed it this morning. Under COVID, things are a little different. We're hoping to file something else today or tomorrow, and then get a court date by early next week, hopefully.
What else did you be filing today?
So we filed a mandamus today. Legally, in order to get this heard on an emergency basis, we have to file a motion for preliminary injunction and then and ask for an emergency hearing.